In this video, I will share an introduction to the science of reading. Questions that will be answered in this video include 1. What is the science of reading? 2. What is the simple view of reading? 3. What is the reading rope? 4. What have we learned from brain research about reading? 5. What is the best way to teach reading? And lastly, 6, why is it important to know about the science of reading? We'll start our journey with question 1. What is the science of reading? Past reading practices were based on observing readers. However, you can't outwardly observe what is happening in the brain of a proficient reader. Recently, there has been more communication and collaboration between educators, educational psychologists, developmental psychologists, cognitive scientists, and cognitive neuroscientists who have been researching this topic for years. The pedagogy and practice proven by extensive research in all of these fields, including the understanding of how our brain learns to read through brain imaging, is what we refer to as the science of reading. So to understand that research, we begin with question 2. What is the simple view of reading? The purpose of reading is comprehension, or in other words, extracting meaning from written text. The simple view of reading was first proposed by researchers Guth and Tunmar in 1986. And has been proven in research again and again since 1990. This simple multiplication problem attempts to illustrate the skills that contribute to reading comprehension. Reading is made of 2 components, decoding and language comprehension, with reading comprehension the product or goal. To have reading comprehension, you have to be able to convert the written words into speech, which is decoding, and understand that speech, which is language comprehension. To illustrate the idea, let's assign 0 for weak and 1 as strong. If decoding is strong, but language comprehension is weak, we are left with a multiplication problem of 1 times 0. And we know that anything times 0 is 0. The commutative property tells us that the order of the numbers does not matter in multiplication. So if it were the other way and decoding were weak and language comprehension were strong, we would still have a product of 0, which means weak reading comprehension. Only when both factors are strong is reading comprehension strong, because 1 times 1 equals 1. If a student is struggling at reading comprehension, you need to test using diagnostic assessments to see whether the issue is with decoding, phonics, or with language comprehension. Only then will you know what to teach in order to improve reading comprehension. The simple view of reading is just that, simple. However, we know that the 2 essential components of reading comprehension, decoding and language comprehension, are both complex, which brings us to our next question. What is the reading rope? Scarborough created the reading rope in 2001 to reveal how multifaceted each component in the simple view of reading is. For either of the 2 essential components to develop successfully, students need to be taught the elements necessary for each. So here's the language comprehension in all of its components, word recognition or decoding in all of its components. All of those come together to create that skilled reading, which ultimately is our reading comprehension. So what have we learned from brain research about reading? Humans are not hardwired to read. Spoken language is acquired naturally, simply by being around people who speak for a few years, whereas reading is a modern innovation. Most believe the earliest known writing to be less than 5,500 years old. No one is born with the connections in their brain needed for reading. We know this through brain imaging. Everyone is born with language part of the brain, which includes speech and meaning parts. Everyone is also born with visual parts of the brain. We easily recognize shapes, places, and faces. However, no one is born with both the connections between vision and speech or language, the connections needed to enable reading. Although we aren't born with the needed connections to read, they can be built or wired one at a time. On average, it takes a child 2 to 3 years to learn to decode English. It is the toughest alphabetic writing system in the world. So, how do we wire a student's brain to read? That leads us to our next question. What is the best way to teach reading? The answer is structured literacy. Structured literacy is an instructional approach that is informed by the science of reading. Our brain is like a muscle and can grow with practice. Brain scans have shown us that non-readers' brains begin to show a connection between the visual and speech part of their brain after as little as 5 hours of training in explicit systematic phonics instruction. So that we'll end here with our last question. Why is it important to know about the science of reading? Well, let's look at the facts. Almost all students are capable of learning to read. It's believed that only around 5% of the population lacks the cognitive ability needed for reading. That means that 95% of our population should be able to read proficiently with quality instruction. However, according to the US Department of Education, 54% of US adults ages 16 to 74 years old, that's roughly 130 million people, lack proficiency in literacy, which means they are reading below the equivalent of a 6th grade level. 2/3 of students who cannot read proficiently by the end of 4th grade will end up in jail or on welfare. And over 70% of American inmates cannot read above a 4th grade level. Unfortunately, we are seeing these numbers because of the way reading is being taught in many schools across the US. In many schools, reading does not align with the science of reading. And many teacher training programs are not teaching the science to educators. So I'm going to leave you today with a famous quote from Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. Thank you.